Hi, well, thanks for waiting. So let's start. Chapter 4, Combat Training. Out of the many things Tsukasa would expect when arriving in a new world, facing off against a group of teenagers training to be their world's next generation of protectors wasn't one of them. Exactly how did he end up getting into this match? To answer that, we'll have to turn the clock back to the day before. True to his words, Ajban has graciously given Tsukasa 3 days to come up with an answer. It was a Sunday, the day after the breach and his arrival in this world. A normal person would spend their day off outside or relaxing. Tsukasa, however, couldn't exactly be called a normal person. Once it opened for the day, the traveler had visited the Academy's vast library. Browsing the many bookshelves and picking out several books that got his attention, Tsukasa sat down in one of the many vacant seats near the back of the building. Skimming through the rather large of books, he only picked out several keywords. Remnant, the Four Kingdoms, Dust, Aura, Huntsmen and Huntresses, Grimm, Faunus. That was all he could gather from the books he admittedly only read with half his brainpower focus on something else. He wasn't doing a great job at it for someone who wanted to learn more about this new world. Sometime during his study session, someone must have spotted him lurking through the various aisle. Within half an hour, a lot of students were peeking at him from the corners, hiding their prying eyes behind random books they plucked out from a random shelf. The chance to see the mysterious warrior from the day before, the one that saved civilians from harm at the hands of the Grimm, was just reading up some common knowledge about their world in the library might be too much for a bunch of teens to pass up. Every so often, one of the students tried coming up to him and talk. Tsukasa usually glanced at them and went back to his reading, ignoring whatever they had to say. Most of them asked the same things: where was he from, how did he get his powers? They were easy to block out. Those students usually gave up after a few minutes of failure. Some did not. There were a couple that stood out to him, mainly because they had some weird questions. One was a young girl that seemed to be younger than her peers. Her most prominent features were her eyes. They were silver. Tsukasa hasn't seen anyone with silver eyes in a long time. She had asked him somewhat nervously if she can have a peek of the ride booker. Taking a look at her, Tsukasa was sure she had been at the breach fighting off what he knew now as the Grimm. The girl had stuck around for a bit, trying to get the writer to open up. The other was the hammer writing girl from before. Unlike the others, she wasn't nervous at all when questioning him very quickly. A plethora of queries ranging from how strong he was to how much he could eat. That was odd. She was joined shortly after by a boy her age that wore a lot of green. He apologized profusely to Tsukasa while trying to drag Hammer Girl away. Then came the period where a couple of professors joined him. They were the same two from the day before. Like the students, Professor Bartholomew Oblek and Professor Peter Port, as they have introduced themselves to him, tried to strike up a conversation with Tsukasa. Tsukasa. Ajban told the staff that you have amnesia. Is that true? Professor Oblek asked like he had downed 10 cups of coffee. Maybe, don't remember. There wasn't any reason for Tsukasa to lie about having amnesia, but there wasn't any reason to tell them the truth. I pity you, Mr. Kadoya. Professor Port had been getting on Tsukasa's nerve with the stories he's been telling the traveler, to have such grand abilities and not knowing how you obtain it. Tsukasa heard the students who had stuck around this entire time whisper among each other from beyond his table. Now that Professor Port had mentioned it, amnesia was a pretty good excuse for him not to tell where the Neo-Deca driver came from. Oh right. We came to tell you that Ajban asked for you to watch some of our classes tomorrow. Oblek informed him. That seemed like a good idea to Tsukasa. Maybe he'll learn something new. The next day passed by quickly. Professor Oblek's class didn't disappoint him. The fast-talking green-haired man taught history. The only problem was that he was talking way too fast for most of the class to understand. Professor Port's class, Grimm Biology or something like that, mainly consists of him telling tales from his youth. Judging from what the students were doing, the ones that weren't staring at him at least, this seemed to be a common occurrence. The last class he was observing was what led him to fight a bunch of teens, combat training taught by Mississippi Good Witch. Over the course of the day, Tsukasa had taken plenty of photos and was about to leave the class when Ms. Goodwitch dropped a bombshell on him. "Mr. Kadoya, why don't you spar with one of the teams?" That was how they want to get more information about his abilities? Having him beat up a bunch of kids? Granted, with aura, they'll be able to take quite a beating before going down. That and Tsukasa was starting to get bored with just watching. Nodding, he down to the arena they had while Ms. Goodwitch tried to find a suitable team for him to fight. After a few moments, she finally called out a name, Team JNPR, please come down. Team JNPR, Tsukasa noted that it was composed of Hammer Girl, her green companion, the Spartan Girl, and Bear Slicing Boy. The latter of whom visibly nervous to be fighting him. They huddled for a minute when they entered the arena, probably coming up with a game plan for him. Tsukasa hadn't gotten his aura unlocked yet. Frankly, he wasn't sure if he wanted it unlocked soon or if he can due to his origins, and he wasn't interested in getting hit by that hammer or bullets from Greenie. So, he took out the Neo Deca driver and put it on his waist, letting it latch onto his body. He opened the driver and took out the Kamen Ride Decade card from the ride booker that formed on the side of the belt, Henshin. Inserting it into the Deca driver, he realized it was the first time everyone in the classroom/arena seen him transform him in person. Kamen Ride Decade. With his suit fully formed, he taunted the surprised Team JNPR to come at him. They came quickly. Greenie and Spartan Girl were pretty speedy, they both slashed at him with their bladed weapons. It was easy to dodge them, fighting Blade was good practice. Hammer Girl and Bear Slicing Boy were fast behind them with their own weapons. Once again, they were easy to avoid. He has to give them credit, though. They were fighting well as a unit. He should make it easier for them. He slid out a new Kamen Ride card from the ride booker, this one depicting a rider with a mostly black helmet, red visors, gold trimmings on the bottom of said helmet, as well as a horn similar to a Hercules beetle. He opened up his driver again and inserted the rider card into it. Kamen Ride Koga. The Neo Deca driver played a whirling sound, and his suit changed again. This time, the form was fairly basic. A black undersuit, with a chest piece, shoulder pads, and gauntlets in the shade of red, with some minor gold trimming in some areas. This form belonged to the man of 2,000 skills and the first Heisei rider, Kamen Rider Koga. Koga, in its red mighty form, was mostly balanced, but was not as strong as Decade with his new driver was and didn't have many weapons. As much as an asshole Tsukasa was, he didn't actually want to injure any kids, Zio and Guai's notwithstanding, seriously. With Koga, he should be able to beat Team JNPR without causing them too much harm safely. After another moment of surprise from the team, they charged at him again. Spartan Girl was the most skilled out of the four of them, even landing a couple of hits when Tsukasa was focused on the other three, though it didn't even scratch him. But Tsukasa wasn't here to play around, he knew why Goodwitch organized this fight. Ojban wanted to know what he was capable of. Normally, he'd mess around with whoever he's fighting with for a bit before defeating them, but he'll have to keep his cards close to his chest. Without any reason to keep the fight going any longer, Tsukasa proceeded to knock each of them out one by one. The blonde boy was first, out of the four. Tsukasa deduced that he was the least skilled in fighting. Disarming him was easy, and a half-powered kick from mighty form was enough to send the remainder of his aura into the red, taking him out of the match. Next came Pinky and Greenie. He really should learn their names. They were a tad more difficult, which wasn't saying much. Pinky hit very hard with her hammer that can also somehow turn into a grenade launcher. Tsukasa wasn't sure how that was possible, but he wasn't really one to talk either, the ride booker being what it is. Greenie, on the other hand, was much more versatile. Even when Tsukasa had knocked out one of his guns from his hands, Greenie was still able to fight. Turns out he also knew some martial arts. Dodging a strike from Spartan Girl, Tsukasa noticed said gun a few feet away. Tsukasa took out a form ride card, portraying a green Koga with a bow gun hybrid. He rolled towards the dropped gun and inserted the card into the Neo Deca driver. Form ride Koga, Pegasus. With another whirl from the driver, Tsukasa's Koga form turned green, his chest plate became more detailed, and his shoulder pads became enlarged. This Koga form was known as the Pegasus form. Picking up Greeny's dropped gun, it transformed into the same bow gun on the card, eliciting a cry of surprise from Greeny. That was the upside of Pegasus form. He was able to hear JNPR whispering to each other on how to deal with him. On the other hand, he could also see and hear everyone in the class with ease. Some of the students scrolled soft snapping sounds as they took pictures of the battle rang in his ears. He could even hear the silver-eyed girl from earlier squeal in excitement at his transformed weapon. Turning his focus back into the match and tuning out everything outside of it, Tsukasa pulled back the handle on the back. He aimed at one of them and pulled the trigger, firing a few shots out from the Pegasus bow gun. Pegasus form was very accurate, and all the shots rang true and hit their target. Hammer Girl went down as well, her aura entering the red. That just left two. Both Greeny and Spartan Girl were demoralized by the defeat of their teammates. Charging up the Pegasus bow gun again, Tsukasa aimed at the former. Letting off another barrage of energy bullets, Spartan Girl pushed Tsukasa's target out of the way, taking the blow for him. They were both pretty beaten up by this point. Their aura gauges were barely on the edge of turning red, while Tsukasa himself was still working at full capacity. It was obvious that they wouldn't last any longer. Before Tsukasa could charge the bow gun again, the two remaining members of Team JNPR shared a look with the other and stopped the match from continuing. "We concede," Spartan Girl announced to the whole room. Judging from the whispers and chattering Tsukasa overheard with Pegasus' heightened senses, it seemed this was the first time she ever lost. "The winner of the match is Tsukasa Kadoya," he heard Ms. Goodwitch announced. With that, he de-transformed, the bow gun reverting into its original form. Now that he wasn't needed in the class anymore, Tsukasa made his way towards the entrance. He gave Greeny a glance when he passed his gun pack to him, getting a small thanks from the teen. Before the obvious barrage of questions from the students could occur, Tsukasa left for his room. Later that day, in his office, Ajban was taking a sip of his drink while reviewing footage of Tsukasa's fight with Team JNPR. It was obvious the amnesiac man, or so he thought, was holding back throughout the fight. While he had displayed great skill against the Grim, Ajban wasn't completely sure how far his combat prowess was. Grim was a good way to test young huntsmen in training but wasn't one to test a veteran huntsman, which the Magenta Warrior had already proven to surpass. In the match, Tsukasa had displayed 2 more forms. That made 5 that had been recorded by Ajban, who wasn't even sure how much the Traveler had overall. The new green form was a surprise, with the ability to turn Mr. Lyren's weapon into his own. Ajban was hesitant to send it to the Veil Council, already knowing how they would respond. In addition to making him give the responsibility of protecting the festival to Ironwood, he was alright with that. The council wanted him to confiscate Tsukasa's belt. That Ajban wasn't okay with. The mysterious traveler didn't seem to be the type to give up without a fight. The reports from the other professors all said the same. He brushed off all attempts to socialize with either the professors or students. The closest he had come to interact with any of the students was with Mr. Ren when Tsukasa had given the former his weapon back. Leaning back into his chair, Ajban let out a sigh. He still didn't know anything about the man, and worse was that he wasn't sure that Tsukasa would agree to his deal. If he leaves Beacon, there was a chance the traveler could fall into her hands. Ajban couldn't let that happen. Tomorrow, he'll get his answers from the traveler, and then he'll figure out his next step. With Tsukasa's help, being a completely unknown factor in this world, there was a chance he'll finally be able to beat her and stop their long war that had taken so many lives, including Ajban's own. Students' dormitory, in a certain room. Like Ajban, Cinderfall also reviewed footage of the match between JNPR and Tsukasa Kadoya that she had taken of the CTT. Once again, the man had displayed powers completely different than anyone has ever seen. Initially, she thought that he had a speed semblance similar to that of Team RWBY's leader and that his gravity manipulation was due to gravity dust. Reading the reports from Ironwood Scroll, that wasn't the case. He didn't even have aura. That was something Cinder expected. She had ordered Mercury and Emerald to tail the man across the campus. It wasn't difficult, many others were also following the man around. It was obvious that the man would have to be kept under observation. Maybe, just maybe, she'll be able to turn him to her cause. In another room. Ah! How could we have lost? Nora Valkyrie was throwing a small tantrum, upset at the team's defeat at the hands of Magenta Man. Nora! We're trying to sleep. Team leader John Ark, while also upset, was dead tired from the match. How could I not? He managed to be Para. The invincible girl. Invincible. While I'm honored to be put in high regards, I'd rather not be. Can we just continue this tomorrow? Para Nikos, alumni of Sanctum, was also tired from the long day. But how? You've never lost a match before? He even managed to turn Ren's weapons into whatever that thing was. Said boy, while used to the antics of his longtime friend, was also trying to get some sleep. Nora, please. We'll talk about this tomorrow. Ren pleaded. Groaning, Nora finally gave in to the requests of her teammates. Fine, but tomorrow we'll be training super hard. We'll beat that guy one day. With that, she immediately fell asleep as if she hadn't been screaming at the top of her lungs just a moment ago. Somewhere, in another world. Overseer, the results have come back. The machine is working perfectly. A man dressed in white reported. The overseer, dressed near exactly to his underling, nodded. Good, prepare for another test. We must reach that world before they find out our plans. Chapter 5, Class is in session. High in his office, Ojban was sorting through reports that just came through in the past few days. Said reports were about some mysterious monsters that have been spotted around the world. A few villages outside the Four Kingdoms were also found to have been destroyed overnight by something other than the creatures of Grimm. Taking a quick breather, Ojban took a sip of his mug to calm himself. His break lasted a few seconds before he received a message from Ironwood. Ojban, we lost contact with another investigation team. That was all he got. Ojban sighed. That made 4 teams in the last 3 days. The only commonality between all the reports was that they all happened after the breach. After the appearance of Tsukasa Kadoya. Does he have something to do with this? Ojban wasn't sure. The man has refused to say anything about his powers, whether it was due to his amnesia or his lack of trust towards everyone, no one knew. All Ojban could do is wait and see for what comes next. Tsukasa was having a bad day, no, a terrible day. Right now, he was in Ms. Goodwich's combat class again. This time, he wasn't here of his own volition. As it turned out, when Ojban meant teach at his academy, what he actually meant was you'll be working under Ms. Goodwich until further notice. It wasn't until Tsukasa accepted his offer did he learn there weren't any vacant position he has to fill, so he was told to be Ms. Goodwich's assistant as well as going to follow the first years when they'll be going out on assignments that were postponed due to the breach at the end of the week. Guess that what happens when a new teacher was hired out of the blue. Tsukasa generally plays by his own rules, so why did he even accept the deal in the first place? Simple, he got curious. The night he fought Team JNPR, he went out on a walk, mainly to memorize the academy's layout and to do some investigating on his own. While taking photos of the various landscaping and buildings, Tsukasa spotted something. Ms. Goodwich and General Ironwood were going to Ojban's tower. That in of itself was odd, but they were soon joined by Ojban himself outside the elevator. He wasn't sure if they had spotted him, but they all entered the elevator and disappeared. A quick opening of a dimensional wall and Tsukasa got a peek into Ojban's office, as Kiba could do. It was a risky play, as they might have noticed a shimmering light in the corner of the room. But no one was around. To Tsukasa, that meant one thing, they were hiding something. So he decided to stay. It would allow him to look around without arousing that much suspicion. The downside was that he was being watched by basically everything on campus. The students who were curious about the man who sealed the breach, the teachers that may or may not have been ordered by Ojban to keep an eye on him, and worst of all were the security cameras. Every major room had one, the library, the classrooms, and even the combat class. That was a problem, but not one Tsukasa couldn't overcome. Now it was a Friday, nearly an entire week since he had awoken in this world. It was odd. He doesn't usually stay in a single world for this long. Regardless, he was now stuck teaching students for the day. Ojpan had called Ms. Goodwitch before class started for the day. That left Tsukasa to take care of several groups of teens for the next few hours. Tsukasa had some rough knowledge of teaching from when he had visited the world of force for the first time, so it wasn't hard for him to develop a study plan. It was just hard actually to go through with it. Many of the students had gotten in their heads that if they were able to beat him, they would become the kings of the school. Bunch of idiots, as if he could be defeated that easily. He had to reject many requests to fight over the day, and now he was teaching the first years. They had the most stubborn students. First was Hammer Girl, or Nora Valkyrie of Team JNPR. It turns out she didn't take her team being defeated without him being hurt in the least. She had been trying to get him to agree to a rematch, only to be dragged off by Greening, or Lai Ren as Tsukasa found out. This went on for a while. The second was a rather large guy named Carden Winchester from Team CRDL. From what he heard from the other students, Winchester had lost badly to Piranicos of JNPR once before. He must have thought that if he can beat the one who could easily defeat the so-called invincible girl, he'll have one-upped her. Fighting for personal glory wasn't something Tsukasa liked, nearly no other writer did really, so he mostly ignored the brute's request. Finally, the last person who had been asking to fight him, much to the annoyance of her teammates, was Yang Xiaolong of Team RWBY. Unlike the others, she wanted to fight him for the thrill of it, to get an adrenaline rush. That was another thing Tsukasa disliked, fighting for fun. While he did like to mess with his opponents, Tsukasa usually had a good reason for fighting them, most of the time. Once again, he ignored the request for a match. What was occupying his mind, however, were rumors of some monsters different than the Grim popping up here and there. He had half a mind to end the class there and then, but he had to keep up appearances. So he waited, watched the current matchup in session, Blake Belladonna of RWBY and one of the boys from Team CRDL. Belladonna was dominating the match, easily dodging blows from Skylark. Within a couple of minutes, she had managed to bring Lark's aura into the red, thus ending the match. Next, Lai Ren against Weiss Schnee. The two were a pair of interesting characters. From some notes Tsukasa had read up on from their file, Lai Ren was an orphan from the continent of Anima. He and Nora Valkyrie were the survivors of a destroyed town and had moved to study at Beacon instead of Haven Academy in the Kingdom Mistral. Weiss Schnee, in contrast, was the heiress to the Schnee Dust Corporation in Atlas. They had a monopoly in dust and had run down most others in the business and had rumors concerning the way the conditions their miners were working in. Dust, while important in this world, didn't really matter much to Tsukasa. Apparently, they stopped working once it left Remnant's atmosphere, so Tsukasa was confident that it wouldn't work in any other world other than this one. Without any reason to actually utilize it, Tsukasa didn't bother buying any. Worst of all, in Tsukasa's opinion, the scientists working on space travel were trying to come up with ways to make dust work in space instead of using another energy source. Being dependent on only one source of power has some massive disadvantages. Back on the match at hand, Ren and Schnee had actually ended up with a tie, as both of their aura had turned red at the same time. He was just about to call on the next set of fighters before the school bell rang, signaling the end of the classes for the day. Finally. Now I can actually focus on something. Tsukasa had basically shooed everyone out and left for the teacher's lounge to grab something to eat. He hadn't eaten since the morning. That was his mistake. Out in one of the many pathways around the school, one that not many students go through, Tsukasa ran into one of the faces he hoped he wouldn't. Come on. Please. Just one. Nora Valkyrie was tailing him, trying to wear down his patience. Lai Ren was right behind her, still giving Tsukasa apologies after apologies about his friend's behavior while trying to drag her away. He has to come up with something quick to get rid of her. Thinking up something to do, Tsukasa finally remembered something from the list of jobs he was given. Tell you what, if you do well with that assignment of yours tomorrow, I'll arrange for a rematch. Tsukasa interrupted her, that'll keep her off his back for the next few days. Really? Damn, she's loud, got it. I'll show you. With that, Nora Valkyrie ran off, presumably to prepare for tomorrow. Tsukasa gave Ren, who got left behind, a quick look. How could you keep up with her? Practice. Ren said before going after his friend. After finally getting something to eat, Tsukasa was on his way back to his room when he bumped into a pair of students. He recognized them. They were one of the few students left that were still following him around campus. Mercury and Emerald from Haven Academy were one of the small groups of people that haven't approached him before. Them just going up to him was setting off red alerts in his head. Excuse me, sir? Emerald was acting innocent, the keyword being acting. Tsukasa knew when someone was keeping up an act around him. That's why something Schwartz had intrigued him. Can we see you transform? That wasn't the first time someone asked him that. Sorry, no, I have somewhere to be. The photos he took the other day should be done processing by now. Can we at least get an autograph? Mercury at least seemed somewhat truthful. He truly wanted his signature. If it weren't for the fact that there was something off about them, Tsukasa would probably have his ego bloated up again. Hearing a scuffle behind him and feeling his pocket get lighter, Tsukasa realized what was wrong with the emerald in front of him. It was an illusion. Turning around, he reached out and grabbed something out of thin air. It was the Neo Deca driver. So that was what they were after. Tsukasa shouldn't be surprised. Unfortunately for them, Kaito had tried pulling something similar to this before, so he was ready for this to happen. I'm giving you one chance. Turn around and forget about it. Unfortunately for Tsukasa, he had assumed that it was some harmless prank. Only I have the ability to use this. The two basically turned tail and ran off. Tsukasa hadn't known that the information he had given them would come back to bite him. Tsukasa was now in a slightly better mood. The photos he'd taken in this world had turned out pretty good. On the other hand, the photo he took when the writer worlds were rebooted had turned out distorted as it usually is. And his mood was about to get worse again. Tsukasa was aware that he'd be chaperoning one of the teams the next day. He just didn't expect it would be them. You'll be accompanying Team JNPR to a village outside of Vale, Ajban had informed him. Tsukasa was confident that Ajban had found out about his earlier conversation with two of its members. He just hoped nothing bad is gonna happen. Students' dormitory, in a certain room. So only he can use it. Cinder had to think up with another plan. Originally, she wanted to obtain the belt and used it for herself. But things went south fast. First, the man had quickly realized that Emerald had an illusion semblance and stopped her from taking off with his belt buckle. Their only saving grace was that the man had thought that it was some sort of prank. Then he told them only he could use it. That was another blow to her plans. Either he was saying that to deter them from trying again, or if it was the truth was unknown. Regardless, it meant that the man had to be convinced to join her. Somewhere, in another world. The overseer was going through the reports. The scout teams had returned with several prisoners ripe for experimenting with as well as some crystals. The humans didn't interest them, and the crystals, which according to the scout teams were imbued with some kind of power, were useless. The humans with animal traits were the real prize. Several of their scientists were hypothesizing the effects of their experiments would have on the faunas as they were called in their world. Before the overseer could continue reading the reports, sirens started blaring in the facility. There was an intruder. Voices came through his intercom. The security guards had spotted the intruder darted into the room with the machine. One of them had broken in, and they just so happened to be in the same room as their one way into and out of that world. The solution was obvious. Activate the machine, send the intruder there. The overseer calmly ordered over the intercom. Trapping one of them there with no way out didn't have its own share of problems. They'll just have to be more careful in that world. but the organization was used to operating in the shadows. Hearing a loud noise come through the speaker followed by a man's shout of surprise, it seemed that the plan worked. Now there's one less problem they have in this world. Chapter 6, Magic and Science. For the first time in a while, Tsukasa got a break. Well, he was fighting again, but at least he has an idea as to why he was brought here. Sidestepping an attack made by one of the two monsters in front of him, Decade was somewhat pitying this so-called scout team's attack dogs. Their masters had already taken off and left the two to distract the destroyer. This mission was supposed to be a simple one. Tsukasa had to keep an eye on Team JNPR while they patrol a town that had been having an increasingly high amount of grim attacks. That he'll end up fighting a pair of monsters from another world wasn't something Tsukasa thought would happen. Earlier that day. It was a nice Saturday morning, the birds were chirping, the sun was shining, and Tsukasa was annoyed by the being of pure excitement known as Nora Valkyrie. That girl has to have consumed a whole bag of sugar to have this much energy. The other members of Team JNPR didn't seem that much surprised by it, so they were used to it. Normally, Tsukasa wouldn't care, but having a teenage girl that was basically bursting with energy constantly saying things ranging from "I'll show you who's the best" to "we're going to be swimming with money from all the grim fur we'll get," he was getting tired of it. In the bullhead on the way to the village a good 20 kilometers or so away from Vale, Tsukasa had the chance to analyze Team JNPR. From the impression they gave him, Team JNPR was pretty well-rounded in terms of skill. Their leader, John Ark, was steadily growing in skill day by day. He was pretty handy with his sword and shield. He also seemed rather sick from traveling high in the sky. The next member of JNPR, Nora Valkyrie, had been very headstrong at fighting from the matches that were organized in Ms. Goodwich's class. She basically hit hard with her hammer at close range and would try to hit opponents from afar with its grenade launcher mode. She was also one of the few people that could possibly annoy him to death. Para Nikos, also known as the Invincible Girl by most of the student body, was the most skilled out of every first and second year student, as far as Tsukasa could tell. The rumors he heard about her had the same point: she has never been defeated before. The first time she's ever lost was against him, which was why most of the school was fascinated by him. Nikos had won some kind of tournament back in her home continent of Mistral, one with a lot of great competition. No wonder she got that nickname. Her shield was very durable, and she wields her short sword, which also could turn into a spear, with great proficiency. She was also comforting her airsick leader. The last member of Team JNPR, the Mistralian named Lai Ren, seemed to be the quiet type. He was quite skilled with his own weapons and was light on his feet. They were discussing something, things like schoolwork. What were they expecting this mission was going to? The village itself was rather isolated. It was situated near a large forest and had a population of about 100 people. When the bullhead landed in the village's outskirts, it was just after 9 in the morning. The five were supposed to head to the town hall and meet the mayor. On the way, they were given a couple of looks from the townsfolk and bumping into a group of curious children. When they met the mayor, Tsukasa got his first clue that something was going on. Lately, several of my people had gone missing in the middle of the night. The mayor was anxious. That was strange. The mayor wasn't sure if the Grimm was involved in any way but had another theory. Have you heard the rumors of strange creatures roaming the kingdoms? I'm confident that they're related to that. Outside, Tsukasa had ordered Team JNPR to split up and patrol the town's outskirts. Ashbin had told him Tsukasa was supposed to shadow the members of JNPR and give a report on how they work alone. However, the circumstances have changed. If Tsukasa was right with his hypothesis, then things were about to go down. A few hours later, Tsukasa's investigation had borne fruit. While questioning the village's various residents, one had told the travelers something that confirmed his suspicions. Near the edge of town, Tsukasa asked around about the night one of the town's residents went missing. Did you saw anything weird that night? Someone you didn't know? This was the fourth person he asked. Tsukasa wasn't expecting the villager's answer. Now that you mention it. Yeah, I saw some guy in white out and about. White clothes, strange creatures, missing people. There was no other explanation. That organization had to be involved. Just as he was about to call Team JNPR back, he saw something out of the corner of his eye. In the tree line, he saw a group of people in the shadows of the trees. They were pretty far away and difficult to spot. Tsukasa wasn't going to admit that he was just lucky to have noticed them. Unfortunately, they had also spotted him, and they knew who he was. They took off from the town and deeper into the forest. Without a second of doubt, Tsukasa ran after them, leaving behind a very confused villager. However, someone else had also seen the rider dart into the forest chasing the shadowed group and followed him. With Team JNPR. Run! Professor Kadoya. Nora, while being her typical loud and energetic self, was filled with worry. Her partner and the new teacher had both gone missing and weren't responding to their scrolls. They were all supposed to meet up just past noon in the village square. However, the two had not shown up. Having known Rin for a long time, she knew that the boy was remarkably punctual, first day of school notwithstanding, and would have been at the meeting point at the chosen time. Joining up with her teammates, they discussed what could have happened to the two. I've tried asking around. One of the townsfolk said Professor Kadoya had run into the forest. Pira told the others. That made sense. There was no way the two wouldn't have heard Nora shouting if they were still in town. But before they could head out, a purple portal opened in the square, and two figures came out. A bit earlier. This forest is deceptively thick. In hindsight, just taking off into a forest without a plan wasn't the best idea. The scroll he was given wasn't even getting a good signal. At least the group he was chasing left an obvious trail for him to follow. Professor Kadoya, there's a clearing ahead. Oh right, that kid was right behind him as well. Lyran had also followed him, curious as to why Tsukasa had gone into the woods. It benefited the dimensional traveler at least, the teen had experience traveling through the dense forests of Mistral. At least he had that going for him. As the green-clad teen had said, there was a small glade ahead, and his targets were there. Taking cover behind some trees, the two overheard the group speaking. What was that man doing here? The guy didn't seem to like the magenta rider, not that anyone would blame him considering Tsukasa's personality. Calm down. We've got nothing to worry about, his colleague was more level-headed, we must return and inform the overseer. Overseer? That was the first time Tsukasa has heard about an overseer. He didn't know that that organization had any sort of overseer. Sir, do you know what he's talking about? His tag-along whispered to him. He'll have to explain things later. Miming a shushing gesture, Tsukasa went back to eavesdropping on his targets. Tibate the machine, we have important intel for the overseer, the Calm One ordered into a device. Send the experiments into Area 2A. We have to get rid of any evidence that we were there. 2A? That has to be the village. A sense of urgency flooded him. Whatever these experiments were, it couldn't be good, not if that organization has anything to do with it. He almost missed what happened next. A purple vortex opened up in the clearing. Tsukasa could feel Ren's silent surprise next to him. The group of men dressed in white entered it and disappeared. Normally, Tsukasa would have stopped them, but he had bigger fish to fry. Signaling to Ren to follow him, he opened up a dimensional wall. He'll deal with the consequences later. Back in the village. The two monsters that came out of the portal were unlike anything the remainder of Team JNPR had ever seen. In 1 minute, the monsters had shattered both John and Nora's auras without any difficulties. The two were off to the side, trying to get up, only Pira was able to fight them to a standstill. Parrying a strike from one, all Pira heard as a warning was a screech before getting hit from above. The first monster had tough skin, able to take blows as it was a gust of wind. It had buffalo horns on the side of its head, and its face was covered in silver and green metal-like substance. This was the Minotaur Phantom, originating the world of Wizard. While the Phantom was more organic looking, its companion seemed like it had come out of a lab. It had dark gray armor-like coverings on its lower torso and legs. Its upper body, on the other hand, was mostly red and mechanical-like parts all over it. Its arms were in the shape of a bird's wings, while its head was similar to that of a plane's. This being was known as a flying smash from the world of Build. Pyrrha, while incredibly talented, couldn't do any harm to the Minotaur Phantom and couldn't focus on the flying smash for too long as the Phantom wasn't relenting in its assault. Taking a step back to catch her breath, Pyrrha turned her sword into its spear mode, realizing it was best to stay out of the Phantom's attack range. However, the invincible girl had thought Minotaur only had physical attacks and wasn't aware of its magical abilities. The Phantom summoned a fireball in its hand and threw it at the girl. Even though she was surprised by the Phantom's ability and was getting exhausted from fighting these new foes, Pyrrha had quick enough reflex to bring her shield up and block the fireball with it. Alas, the force resulting from the blast was much stronger than she anticipated, knocking her off her feet. Pyrrha! For a brief moment, Pyrrha had thought that this was how she would time, fighting an unknown foe the likes of which Remnant have never seen before. It would have been had it not been for the timely arrival of the Destroyer of Worlds. Attack Ride, Blast. A hail of bullets came from behind the monsters and shifting their attention from the fallen huntress in training. Tsukasa Kadoya, already transformed into Decade, stood there, his ride booker in its gun mode in the rider's hand. You three, Tsukasa, oddly calm despite the situation, addressed his students, help your friend evacuate the villagers. With that, he turned his attention back to the experimental monsters. With its natural enemy here, the Phantom and Smash got ready to face the Magenta Rider. A Phantom and a Smash? How did they manage to create them? While the Smash was feasible for them to create, the Phantom was a completely other matter. It was either an artificial one, which raised the question of how that organization got their hands on the equipment needed, or it was one born out of the gate, which meant that they had killed someone. Tsukasa wouldn't be surprised if it was the latter. That organization didn't have many morals. The Destroyer opened his driver and took out a new Kamen ride card, depicting a rider with a mask that shined like a gemstone. As Tsukasa loaded the rider card into the Neo Decadriver, the Minotaur Phantom threw a fireball at the stationary rider. Kamen Ride, Wizard. The fireball hit its target, engulfing the rider in flames. Onlookers were treated to the sight of the man who sealed the breach dying in a blaze of fire. Or so they thought. Hi hi, hi hi hi. The flames were absorbed a red magical circle. Inscribed into the circle's circumference was an ancient language, and in the center was the symbol of Kamen Rider Wizard, the last hope. Standing where he was before, Decade had transformed into Wizard, a magician that had managed to hold on to his hope while at the edge of despair. Wizard had a black undersuit with a metallic trenchcoat, and his chest was adorned with large ruby red gemstone and his wrists and ankles. His new mask was a red gemstone bordered by a silver-colored material. A line of the material had given the mask an impression of visors. In the center of his forehead was a yellow crystal in between two thin straight horns. Shining on his left hand was a large ring in the shape of Wizard's mask. Wasting no time, Tsukasa ran at the two monsters. Turning the ride booker into its sword mode, he slashed at them, managing to damage the Phantom/Smash duo. The flying Smash took off and tried to attack the rider from above. Without much success, he could dodge with ease. Punching the Minotaur Phantom back, Tsukasa took out an attack ride card that was different from the others. It had a golden version of Wizard symbol on it, with golden text underneath it. He inserted the card into the Neo Decadriver, it announcing a new phrase. Final attack ride, WIWI Wizard. A smaller magic circle manifested next to Tsukasa, and he put his arm through. A much larger version appeared behind the recovering Phantom, and a gigantic arm came out, slapping the magical monster away. Taking his arm out of the magic circle, the rider changed his weapon back into its gun mode. Aiming for the Smash that was soaring high above him, Tsukasa fired and successfully managed to hit the nebula creature several times, causing it to come crashing onto the ground. Hearing the sound of fast footsteps behind him, Tsukasa reinserted the final attack ride card and activated it again. Just as he thought, the Minotaur Phantom had tried charging at the rider from behind him, only to run into another manifestation of Wizard's magical circle. This version had a ring of fire surrounding it, simulating the effects of the Defend Ring. The Phantom had run headfirst into the circle and was thrown back the way it came from. "This is the end of the line for you, Phantom," Tsukasa thought sardonically and inserted the Golden Attack Ride card once again. Final Attack Ride, WIWI Wizard. Once again, a magical circle appeared, this time underneath the rider's foot. Said foot was then engulfed with flames before D-Wizard jumped high in the sky. With his foot aflame, Tsukasa performed a flying sidekick, striking the Phantom in the head. The rider kick was strong enough to send the monster flying and caused it to blow up in a fiery explosion. Landing perfectly, Tsukasa dusted his hands off and readied another Kamen ride card. Turning to the remaining monster, which was just getting up, the magenta rider loaded it into the Deca driver and activated it. Kamen Ride, Build. Out of his driver, tubes materialized and formed model kit-like runners in front and behind him. Red and blue liquid flowed through the tubes and formed two half-bodies within the runners. The two half-bodies slammed together onto Tsukasa, forming the armor of the amnesiac genius physicist, Kamen Rider Build. Steel Moon's Ult. Rabbit Tank. Yeah. Keeping the black undersuit, the red half-body formed the mask and legs left side along with the right arm while having a red compound eye in a rabbit's head. The blue half-body was the opposite and had the design of a tank. Around his left leg was a white spring, while the sole of his right foot had the treads of a tank. Taking a stance, the spring coiled up, and Tsukasa leaped towards the flying smash, instantly covering the distance between the two remaining fighters within a few moments. Kicking the smash, the rider took out his ride booker in its sword mode. With only one left, it should be a breeze for Tsukasa. The smash, however, had also realized that it stood no chance against the Destroyer of Worlds alone. Spreading its arm out, it tried to take off and spread chaos elsewhere, only to be stopped by a kick to the back. You won't be getting away that easily. Taking out a new card depicting a yellow and light blue form for build. Inserting the card into the Deca driver and activating it, the runners had appeared again. Two new half-bodies manifested, colored yellow and light blue. Form Ride Build, Lion Cleaner. The main Cyclone. Lion Cleaner. Yeah. The two half-bodies snapped together, changing D-Build's form into that of Lion Cleaner. The lion half was yellow, with the eye was that of a lion's head, along with a large lion gauntlet on his arm. The cleaner half was light blue, the eye being in the shape of a vacuum cleaner, and attached to the left arm was a vacuum cleaner with a container on its shoulder. The winged smash had once again tried to flee while its opponent was distracted. Pointing his left arm at the retreating monster, Tsukasa activated the weapon, and a rush of air was sucked into the vacuum. The smash wasn't giving up and still attempted to fly away. With the smash basically being a sitting duck, being unable to get away, Tsukasa loaded a Golden Attack Ride card with build symbol on it into the driver. Final Attack Ride, BUBU Build. Glowing yellow energy radiating around the lion's side's arm, Tsukasa threw a punch at the flying monster. A large yellow manifestation of a lion's head appeared and consumed the flying smash before exploding along with the monster. Taking a deep breath, Tsukasa finally relaxed. Transforming, the rider heard the sound of several airships arriving. From the sky, roughly 20 Atlassian robots jumped out and landed in the remainder of the village square, as most of it was severely damaged in the fight. The robot soldiers spread out to secure the area. Professor Kadoya. Tsukasa turned to see that Team JNPR had returned, all except for Lai Ren being injured. Great! Looks like I have some explaining to do. An hour later. Now on a bullhead back to Vale, Tsukasa was getting bombarded by question after question. Team JNPR, well, two of them at least, were trying to get answers from him. Tsukasa was a patient man, coming up with long-term strategies as if it was as easy as baking a cake. But having some teenagers, one very, very loud at that, constantly chattering in his ear, his patience was wearing thin. Lyrin and Piranikos were being rather considerate, not asking about anything. The former also seemed to be in deep thought about something, most likely about what he had seen in the forest. Mentally groaning, he realized he'd have to come up with something to stop the boy from telling his teammates about it, and fast. Guys? I don't think it would be best to disturb Professor Kadoya right now. Pyrrha interrupted her teammates. She was starting to be his favorite. At least she wasn't as annoying as the other two. That seemed to have calmed the two down, though Nora was more reluctant to do so. Now he finally had some time to collect his thoughts. This day had not been the best for him. That organization is here and is most likely the culprits of the destroyed towns and the monster sightings. A beep rang out, and his scroll vibrated, interrupting his thoughts. Come to my office when you return. Oh great, as if the day couldn't have possibly gotten any worse. Now he has to meet up with Ajpin and explain things. He wasn't even close to figuring out what the headmaster was hiding, being extremely busy most of the time. Taking a deep breath to calm himself, Tsukasa put that thought away. There was a bigger problem. That organization. Foundation X. They had gone quiet ever since the Enigma incident nearly 3 years back. Now that he was thinking of it, Enigma, or whatever parts they could have salvaged from it, was most likely the reason they had arrived in this world. Now Tsukasa just has to find it and destroy it. That won't be easy. Foundation X. Now that they know the Destroyer of Worlds is here, they'll retaliate accordingly. Tsukasa hasn't had much experience going against them as some other riders, but he had a general idea. They tend to hide in the shadows but weren't afraid to fight any riders who found out their plans. Unbeknownst to him, one of the riders he was thinking about, one who was involved in the Enigma incident, was in this world with him right now. In Vale. Hello? Mister? You okay? Opening his eyes, the man was greeted by a pair of silver ones. Feeling a brief headache go through his head, he tried getting up. Yes, I think so. Thank you for worrying. The man felt at ease and took a look at his surroundings. He was by the sea, evidently at some docks judging from the ship that was nearby. In addition to the young girl, there were 3 others with him. All of them were girls as well and were slightly older than the first one. You sure, dude? You were out for quite a bit. The blonde one said. Why were you doing sleeping out here? The dark-haired one asked. I don't remember. The man answered truthfully. His headache was stopping him from recalling why he was passed out. What, do you also have amnesia? A white-haired girl asked with a hint of sarcasm in her voice. Weiss, don't be rude. The silver-eyed girl addressed the white-haired one. No, I don't think so. His headache was starting to clear up. Once it did, he let out a shout, startling the 4 girls. Ah! Where is it? Digging through his pockets, he searched for his most treasured possessions. What's wrong? He mostly ignored out of distress before his hands touched what he was looking for. Phew! That was a shock. Nothing, I'm fine now. Grasped in his fist was the broken Taka medal. If he had lost that, he would never forgive himself. But so long as he had that and underwear for tomorrow, Eiji Hino would be fine.